Through Jesus Christ, your Son, our Lord, who lives and reigns with you in the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever.
Amen.
Our Father,
who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Let us bless the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
The Almighty and merciful Lord, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, bless and preserve you.
Amen.
with Pastor Jordan rebaptizing and such, so I hope it sticks this time. We are, without any further ado, going to spend the morning looking at one of the most interesting parables in the Gospels. This is from Matthew chapter 20, so we're kind of moving along. The parable of the laborers in the vineyard. And I'm sure that you've heard it. I preached on this, I think it was last fall, when we had it in the lectionary. But it is a really remarkable parable along the way. So notice right off the bat, you remember we finished chapter 19 with this whole thing about the rich man coming, and then Peter and the others saying who then could be saved, and such. So now this is Jesus' kind of further explanation of who can be saved along the way. For the kingdom of heaven is like a master of a house who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. After agreeing with the laborers for a denarius a day, he sent them into his vineyard. And going out about the third hour, he saw others standing idle in the marketplace. And to them he said, "You go into the vineyard too, and whatever is right I will give you." So they went. Going out again about the 6th hour and the 9th hour, he did the same. And about the 11th hour he went out and found others standing. And he said to them, "Why do you stand here idle all day?" They said to him, "Because no one has hired us." He said to them, "You go into the vineyard too." And when evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, "Call the laborers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last up to the first." Now, before we hear the second half of the parable, let's kind of think on this one for a moment. So, God rules the kingdom like this. This is how things work in God's kingdom. That's how this begins. This is how things work in God's kingdom. It's like a master of a house who hired laborers for his vineyard. And so it starts off quite innocently, I would say. He goes out, these are day laborers, they agree on a denarius a day, a day's wages, and they go out into the vineyard to do their work. And this continues. He keeps going out roughly every 3 hours, to the 3rd hour, the 6th hour, the 9th hour, and then the 11th hour, or an hour before the end of the workday. So again and again and again he goes out, and with each one he answers, "You go to the vineyard, and whatever is right, I will give you." And that's the word just. Whatever is just, whatever is right, I will give you. So that's kind of an interesting little hint on what is going on in this parable along the way. But notice the difference between what happens at the beginning of this day and the end of the day. He starts out with going for laborers. He makes this agreement with them about a denarius. And then at the end of it, at the end of the day, at the 11th hour, he goes to them and says, "Why do you stand here idle all day?" And they say, "Because no one has hired us." Now, what's the problem there? Because there's sort of an oddity there. What's the oddity in the parable of that?
Where were they the first 3 calls?
Exactly! Why weren't they there at the first time, the 3rd hour, the 6th hour, the 9th hour? He's been there every 3 hours, and they weren't there. So, why not? Were they lazy? Were they sleeping in? We don't know. Dave thinks that's probably what they were doing. It seems likely. For whatever reason, they weren't there at that time. And so he immediately hires them. And there's no question of payment. The only one that he makes the specific agreement on payment with is who? The very first group. The rest of them are no, because they're not even working a full day. They know that they're going to get whatever they get. And that is essentially up to the good wish of the landowner. Dennis.
Wasn't the denarius enough money to feed your family for that day?
Right. I mean, this is a day's work. This is a pretty standard day laborer's day's work. So that's nothing uniquely extravagant or low. That would be normal for a day laborer working in the vineyard. So we can kind of see in this, to get this going, that the ones at the beginning have a specific expectation. And I think that's what I want you to just notice here along the way. Is their expectation is very concrete. We're going out, we're doing this, we're getting paid this much for this amount of work. Very straight up. The rest of them don't negotiate a payment because they're not working. This is not an hourly rate. This is a daily rate. And whatever it is, it's less than a day at this point. And so they're kind of going to get what they get. I think that's a part of the picture you have to get here. I don't know this for a fact. Maybe one of you knows, but I am curious on when the notion of hourly wages sort of became the norm. Had to be Industrial Revolution, if not later, I would think. So that is 19th, maybe even early 20th century kind of concept of how you divide work. Prior to that, a day is a unit of measurement for this point. Is everybody with me to this point? So we've got one group that have very specific expectations. The rest of them, their expectation is he's going to give them what he gives them. And whatever they get, they're going to get. And that's pretty much, that's all they can expect, because they're working less than a day. Because they're not working full day's work. Everybody with me? Okay. And when those hired about the 11th hour came, each of them received a denarius. Now, when those hired first came, they thought they would receive more. But each of them also received a denarius. And on receiving it, they grumbled at the master of the house, saying, "These last worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us, who have borne the burden of the day and the scorching heat." But he replied to one of them, "Friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for a denarius? Take what belongs to you and go. I choose to give to this last worker as I give to you. Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or do you begrudge my generosity?" So the last will be first and the first last. All right. So we have either an extremely generous landowner or maybe senile or something. Because what he does is not what was expected. It's not what was reasonable. It's not what was fair. And I think that's one of kind of one of the big words that we have to kind of have to talk through in this whole thing, the concept of fair. So notice too, this is all about the people that started the day and ended the day. So the 3rd hour, 6th hour, the 9th hour, they're just there for color commentary, essentially. There's no real mention of them other than they get paid the same as the 11th hour. And he starts with the 11th hour ones getting paid the denarius. So put yourself into this situation, okay? Have any of you ever worked when the working conditions were not fair? I correct myself. Working conditions are very rarely fair in the terms that we kind of think of. This is kind of a remarkable picture of not fair. I was hoping you were going to raise your hand and tell me they needed a union. I'm sorry, Larry. Please.
I'll send you into the battle.
Excellent.
Okay. I think it's a great passage from the standpoint of making us think about the meaning of work. Fair is not the same as equal.
That's right.
If I take, which I did know,
Yep.
this is denarius, and it's enough to feed yourself. All he's done is fed these people. He's being a good steward. Labor.
Right.
Labor is a natural resource.
Sure.
You don't want them
No point in having them
fair
their way.
and equal are not the same.
Yep, that's true. That's very true. So we get this. Now, from the perspective of the laborers, and I think that really is the key to thinking about this parable, is put yourself into the different positions in this story. It's always an interesting exercise when you talk about parables, is to kind of, it's sort of like, all right, let's try this pair of shoes on, see how they fit. Do I fit in the shoes of the landowner doing this? Do I fit in the shoes of the guy working at the 1st hour and grumbling over this because he kind of expected that since all of these who work less than him were going to get paid, he should get paid more, which is at one level a reasonable expectation. But at another level it isn't. Why? They had made an agreement. And kind of what the landowner did with the rest of the day laborers kind of wasn't his business. But the fact is that all takes place in a very public setting where they're just kind of lining up and they're each getting paid. This is all happening. Everybody can see what's going on. Dennis.
The first workers had a right to their denarius.
Okay.
The last ones had no right to anything more than a portion of a day's work.
Sure.
And so he is absolutely right in saying, did you not agree?
Right.
This is my generosity to them has no bearing on what we agreed. So
Yep. So we can look at that from the perspective of the landowner and kind of see, I'm going to use my resources to, as I see fit. I have the denarius. I'm going to get what labor I can from it. These people are there available to work. They might as well be doing it. And the fact that they get paid a denarius for less than a day's work is, you could say sort of the cost of doing business. That is, but there's also the notion that this is generosity on his part, that he didn't have to do it that way. There was no contract with them. There was no legal requirement on their part that it worked this way. He did not have to do it this way. He chose to. There were a couple of hands. So you can go over to Gary and then.
It reminds me a little bit of the parable of the prodigal son.
Sure.
Because the people who are outraged or feeling self-righteous, the ones at the beginning of the day are like the son who stayed behind and cared for the father and felt that he was righteous and he deserved everything.
Sure.
And then along comes the parable, along comes the prodigal son who has wasted away everything.
Right.
Comes, after the day is, so to speak, almost done, and he gets all the final glory.
Right. He gets the party thrown for him. Yep. That is a perfect parallel to this. Absolutely. Andy.
It's almost, could be another parable in this parable, just kind of different. Here, but looking at the opposite
Sure.
side, but almost like the healing of the lepers. Only one came back, he fell
Right.
down at Jesus. And
Right.
said, thank you. He said, what about the others?
What about the other
So
9?
it's almost like, the ones that only work an hour, be curious to see what their take was.
Right. Right. Bob and then Claire.
But I figured the thief on the cross.
Yeah.
I've
There you
been
go.
Christian all my life.
Right? Yeah, that's kind of the ultimate 11th hour, isn't it? That's right. Today you will be with me in paradise. Yeah, well said. Larry, and then Walt.
I'm not sure how to do it, but I'm beginning to think there is a correlation between generosity and God's mercy.
I think that there's something to be said for that. Yeah. Yeah, I do. I think that's going to be worth some exploring on our part. I agree.
Well, wasn't he just talking to the disciples, and the disciples were just arguing, like, who's the biggest dude around?
Right. You got it. This is right after the.
I'm going to be your right hand.
Right.
No, it's me.
Right. This is right after you had the. What are we going to get?
Yeah.
And you're going to sit on the 12 thrones and judge the 12 tribes of Israel, etc. And I'm going to go out on a limb here and say a part of what Jesus is doing with this essentially is saying to the apostles, you're going to be acting as the landowner here. Are you going to be generous? Or are you going to be miserly? Does that make sense? So the ones who are kind of the establishment, the ones who are the foundation of the church, built on the apostles and prophets with Jesus Christ as the cornerstone, as we get in Ephesians. They're the ones that are that kind of give out God's generosity. How do they understand themselves? Do they see themselves in the position of this guy that works at the first hour, who's wanting to get more than his fair share? Or do they see themselves in the posture of the ones giving out mercy, as Larry very rightly put it? And I think we're starting to get at one of the keys to this parable, and that has to do with this fair and equal and generosity thing. That what they get paid is what they are given from the landowner. And even if we see the ones at the beginning have the contract, even for them, that is still the generosity of the landowner who's hiring them and not somebody else. So here's one place for us to explore is the question of the question of where does equality fit in connection. I lost it. It'll come back. I'm certain it'll come back. Is there another hand while I'm waiting for it to come back? Andy. Yeah. Anybody else?
Hey, okay, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Andy. Let's just wait.
I'm waiting. Okay. I heard something this past week, and it was something about some posters or something that were printed up that were posted. I guess in this area where there's a school, one of the schools is going through all kinds of, racial slurs and things like that. And, that's a problem. We
Yep.
shouldn't be doing that. But one of these stickers that they mentioned in the same breath was a sticker that had a saying on it, equality is a false god. And I thought about that for a couple of seconds, and I thought, I like that.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, and we obviously equality is one of these words that has a multitude of meanings, and it's one of these sacred words in American parlance. That all men are created equal, etc. So I know. So it is one of these words that's a very loaded word for us that can have a lot in there. Now, Heather, did you have
I
a?
did. What was the opposite of begrudge?
What's the opposite of begrudge? I think you get grudge and grumble are kind of together. So I believe the opposite would be something like rejoice. To rejoice in God's generosity, which is a very interesting idea too. Yeah. Now, how come Rick keeps moving? You gotta stop moving. I can't find you. Yes, that's true. Please, it's your turn if you had something to say.
Well, again, you're starting with the equality issue. I mean, equality, as Andy mentioned, is this modern philosophy that we're all equal.
Right.
We all are equal under God. We all deserve eternal damnation.
Yeah, that's right. There's more than one kind of equality, right?
And ultimately, all of these work
If you want fair, you really want to be fair, you want to go there. Yeah, that's one equal. Okay, for all of sin fallen short of the glory of God. There you go. That's equal. Yeah. Now there was another Richard and then Levi.
At the risk of interjecting American affairs, this seems like politically where we're at our society today. What's fair, what's equal. One could say what this landlord did. He was doing social welfare.
Yes. Sure. He was right. He was being generous. I had. This is a slight aside, but this semester in my Aquinas class, it's a history of preaching class, and so I'm reading about one of the most famous preachers of the early church. His name is John Chrysostom, and he was a bishop in Constantinople, and I believe I've got this right. That when he was in Antioch, before he went to Constantinople, the church in Antioch cared for approximately 3,000 widows and orphans all the time, full time. The church provided for them, period. 3,000. And that was what their offering was for caring for all of the people that society had left behind. And I thought, that's a lot of generosity. That's an interesting picture of what the church does. And so the reason I'm reading about it is that he's trying as the priest there to help the deacons and the deaconesses make sure that they're doing this so that he can be doing the ministry of the word and preaching. But, you know, you've got these 3,000 people that need to live and eat, and their sole reliance is in the church. Nobody else is caring for them. There's no welfare as we think of it today. It's really quite a remarkable little section. So, and that's my point being that is historically kind of how the church thought about generosity. Was we're going to care for our people. Period. That's kind of that's what that means. And it strikes me as very interesting because the notion of doing that today in the church, I think, would be something along the lines of, or I'm afraid that we're going to be taken advantage of. And we don't really have, certainly not at that scale. We don't have good comparisons in Rockland. You wouldn't have to go too far to find some very real comparisons to that. But that is just an interesting insight. Well,
A stewardship moment.
a stewardship moment. Please, Mr. Stewardship.
We should all be ruthless givers.
Ruthless givers. I like that.
Just say it.
Ruthless givers. So, rejoice in generosity. Yes. So, Larry.
I don't know if you have any guidance on this, but it seems to be an unanswered question. Is my sister's at EA at Stockton. She prosecutes criminals.
Yep.
So I have a tendency to be pretty law and order. I mean,
Yep.
grandfather was a cop.
Yep.
Sister's married a cop. My mom
Yep.
was a court reporter. But this is the deal. Somewhere along this, I like the idea of the church taking care of people, but the taking advantage, I ask myself this, and I don't know what the answer is. How many wrongdoers or people that would take advantage of me am I willing to tolerate to make sure that one does not go hungry?
That's right. That's a good question. And here's my answer to that right now. I think that we are going to find out. I think it's going to happen in my lifetime, for sure, that the social order of how things have worked in our country are going to erode more and more. And so the need, the very concrete need of people in our own community and our own church community and our community beyond is going to increase. And that pressure for us in the church to wrestle that question to the ground is going to get more and more prominent. And I don't have an answer for you, but I am quite confident that is on the way, one way or another. And all we have to do is go to churches in most of the rest of the world to kind of see how that has played out.
I forget the name, but the Lutheran church downtown where I work, they have showers twice a week and they give out food. It's
Yeah.
really a wonderful model.
Yeah. I believe it. All right. David, you had your hand. No? Is there another hand over here? Dennis.
As far as generosity is concerned, we just need to not be concerned about the fairness of equality.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of us being faithful to what Christ has asked us to do. And in fact, isn't it the Catholic Church that makes almsgiving a sacrament?
Yeah, well, not a sacrament, but you can see it from there. Yeah, it's a sacrament, sacramental. Yes. Barbara.
The reason that this would erode is part parable is selfishness of these people. They're all concerned about themselves, and I think that is more prevalent in our society now. They're so concerned about themselves. We have so much of that self-actualization and people protecting themselves. That's what these people were doing. They're trying to protect what they feel is theirs.
Yeah, and again, at one level that is reasonable. It is, but at the other level, we can see the danger. This is a quotation from the CPH's commentary on Matthew by Dr. Jeffrey Gibbs, and I really liked his word odious. In this little story, however, all comparisons are odious, and such comparing reveals the dangers of an envious and evil spirit. But this good owner, all will ultimately be treated the same at the end of the day. Yeah, and so the challenge there is the notion of comparisons, and it is so difficult to avoid making comparisons. And in my mind, the part of the challenge that we're faced is, remember, this starts with God rules like this. That's how the parable begins. This is how God thinks. This is how God works. And now, how does that shape us? Levi.
It's interesting. There's so many layers to this parable. Yeah. I mean, you can see it's still just as controversial today as it probably was received back then. You know, our reactions haven't changed here.
Yeah.
But there's also, I mean, there's so much to it, even as you think about, well, what does this mean for Jews and Gentiles, right? Who's going to get the kingdom, you know, right? Is it the Jews who have been God's people from the beginning of time,
right?
Or the Gentiles who come in late? I think the same, or even how we even justified before God, right? So by His mercy,
and that's why looking at this parable and kind of asking what's the point of comparison is a very interesting one. Where does Jesus want the disciples to find themselves in this parable? I think that the expectation is that they see themselves as the first hour workers. The ones that are in at the ground level, the ones that have been there all along, that have done the work, that are going to get paid what they deserve, and that's what they're going to get. That's kind of the expectation, and that is a comparison that Jesus has often made with the Jews or with the Pharisees. That you've got a group that have been God's chosen ones that have a place of honor in the kingdom, which is not wrong. But the door didn't shut at that point. And that's sort of the question, is what happens with the rest. That's in there.
Can you go back to Peter's complaint?
Oh, in chapter 19?
Yeah, or his plea, or his, I don't want to cause him trouble.
Yep. See, we have left everything and followed you. What then will we have? So Peter is Peter's very interested in making sure that he gets his denarius, right? And notice, and Jesus' response to Peter isn't "Get behind me, Satan," which would have been legitimate at that point. Jesus' response is, "In the new world, when the Son of Man will sit on his glorious throne, you will have followed me, will also sit on 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. Everyone who has left houses, or brothers, or sisters, or father, or mother, children, or land for my name's sake will receive 100-fold and will inherit eternal life. But many who are first will be last, and the last first." See,
that's at the end of the other parable.
Yeah, that's at the end of the other parable too. So that's kind of the bracket here. And this is why, though, I think what what Jesus is looking to is for them to see themselves not as the first hour laborers who get the denarius, but the ones who receive 100-fold and have got more to spare and that they need to be giving it out. Does that make sense? Because that is a very different way of looking at your life.
I agree, and then, sorry about that, the book ends with that statement. It reminds me of the 99 sheep, you know?
Yeah.
I rejoice more of the one than the 99 that didn't go
That's right.
there.
That's right.
And that is, like you say, it's that.
So are we a part of the rejoicers at the one, or the grumblers that it's getting crowded? Or whatever. That's the trouble.
Pastor, do you serve because you get a paycheck, or do you serve because you have a call from Christ? Now, the answer, of course, is yes. but which one runs? For example, the first is a contractual arrangement.
Right.
The second is a merciful arrangement.
Right. Right.
And I haven't fleshed that all out.
Yeah, that's an interesting challenge. And I think you could argue that just to a certain extent, that question can kind of run for any Christian when it comes to vocation. Do you do what you do, whatever that may be, simply in order to get a paycheck? Or is this a place where God has put you to show generosity and to serve Him by serving your neighbor? I think that's a very different way of looking at work, just kind of across the board. Catherine, and then Paul.
Maybe you answered this already, I'm sorry. But I know that perhaps only when I was younger, but perhaps often, and a lot of times when people see this, there is a sense of, well, how about then I just wait until I'm near death and be a Christian? Because if God really is more excited for the one that has gone astray, I can do astray.
God likes,
you know, just
I
saying.
like sinning, God likes forgiving.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, hypothetically speaking. I have friends.
And that is,
The only problem with that is you might guess wrong, you might die.
I know, but you know, that's the gambler in us. You know, how do we deal with that?
we are not the first to wrestle with that question. In fact, that was a common challenge in the 4th century when Christianity kind of moves. When Christianity moves from being essentially a persecuted quasi-underground church to more of the legal institution and the religion of the empire. So in that 100-year span, it became, and even before, it was fairly common for people to postpone their baptism until near their death. So the Emperor Constantine, for instance, to use today's language, self-identified as a Christian from about, 313 or something like that, but was baptized on his deathbed in 337. That was fairly common, and that was a challenge that they faced in the church precisely because of that issue. So, yeah, and I don't have really an answer to that.
Oh,
Sorry.
great.
Was there another answer? Yeah, Walt.
Well, this is just it. We should be, as we're all Christians, we're all saved, I assume, and we all have faith because we're coming here. But we should be living in mercy,
Right?
and we really don't. I mean that it's like it's so hard to live in mercy moment.
Right. Right. And that's kind of where one level, and maybe the most obvious way of reading this parable and of understanding this parable, is to recognize God's generosity to us. That as Dr. Gibbs put it, comparisons are odious, and that God's mercy extends to all. First hour, third, sixth, ninth, 11th hour. So I think that therefore, the next question is, how does that shape how we look at our neighbors? That's my question. Julia.
Going back to Catherine's point, I think a very valid point, I've seen people not necessarily do that, but kind of think that way, and we're all guilty of thinking that way at some point. I think, and I don't know the answer, but I think part of the problem with that is you spend your life living in sin, claiming to, repent later, clean up your act later, is that's time. I see parables of working. The work is, I don't know if this is right, but I think it's spreading God's word, living as a Christian. And so if you spend that time living in sin, that's time where you're actually depriving people of the word.
The gospel.
I don't know if that's,
Sure.
I don't know if that's
Sure.
correct.
No, I think you're on the right track. And I mean, and it's interesting. We do have. We're going to talk about this more in Lent, so I don't want to give Lent away too much. But we do have a tendency to romanticize sin and to make sin the forbidden fruit, right? I mean, that's what it is. And I think it's in 1 Peter where Peter talks about being redeemed from your empty way of living, and that what sin actually reveals is being turned in on oneself and an emptiness because you are not filled and you're not looking out, and so you're only kind of staring at your own void. And that is the nature of sin. And that even though it may be gratifying for a moment, that emptiness keeps coming and coming and coming. It doesn't relent. And that is the challenge. But that is something that every Christian every day wrestles with. I think. Whether we're consciously wrestling with it or not. Is that notion of why do I do what I do? Ada, you have your hand up for.
Well, I want to talk about the current situation. Being in Mexico for 2 weeks, and I came home, and I thought how fortunate I am to have this home, God's face be here.
Right.
In my ancestors, and probably a lot of you have come here because of persecution.
Sure.
We can trace it back to the Inquisition.
Sure.
Of the Protestants.
Yeah. Yep.
So anyway, I was watching the front line on PBS the other night, and one of the refugees, he was in camp, and he had been there and he was waiting for an acceptance, and he thought he was going to be denied, and he says, where is the humanity? And building a wall is just, I can't comprehend that. I can't comprehend people wanting to have a better life and they're denied. Where is our humanity in it?
I do think.
It's because of fear. I think a lot of it's because of fear. But I don't know. It just bothers me a lot.
Well, I understand, and I'm with you on that. I do think that a part of what you see in a in a parable like this is our own fear or tendency toward grumbliness. Is that a word? That should be a word. Our own tendency toward grumbliness when we think that somebody else might get something. That somehow or another there is in our spirit a notion that somebody else being given something means that I must be getting less than I deserve. I mean, that's kind of our first hour guide, right? Because the 11th hour gets the same as he does, his presumption is that he's somehow getting the shaft in this process. So, not surprisingly, I don't have any brilliant answers on the political situation, so I'm not going to try. But I would say, speaking for ourselves as a congregation, a part of what we have to continue to learn to do is see ourselves from the position of the generous landowner who has much to give and much to share and much to serve and many to serve, and not from the position of the first hour who just wants to make sure he gets paid every nickel he's up. Because the more we see ourselves in a position of entitlement, the worse off we're going to be as a congregation. Does that make sense? I think that's pretty important for us. Catherine and then Dennis.
Well, and one of the things, addressing my own question, thinking about it, I think one of the problems that my friend who might have issues with that runs into is that we tend to think of ourselves as that first hour person.
Right.
When actually, we're already maybe have been here all the time, are the last hour person.
Right.
And
we're the last hour by 2,000 years.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe 6,000 years.
And so,
I don't know.
And maybe that means that we need to be reminded of our sin.
Well, we have to rethink it.
And that is perhaps where the bankruptness is of a church that tells you can earn your way.
Right.
Because as much as it sounds terrible to say, you must be reminded of your sin, if we aren't, we think we are that first hour person.
Right.
And that's a dangerous place to be.
You nailed this on the head. I think what happens with us is that we go back and forth from a point of generosity to a point of fear and scarcity.
Mm-hmm.
So we're either afraid there's not enough, we've got to hold on to everything that we have,
right?
Or we can look at God as the generous God that He is and accept what we receive in rejoicing and generosity to others. So it's a tough one.
I'm going to add a third category to that. I do think that you're right, that's two of the poles. The third one in that triangle, and I'm not quite sure what to call it, but I'll call it living in a fantasy of the future, believing that what I do now has no impact on the future.
Right.
Or if you prefer, living on credit. Which is also very much what we do as a culture, is live on credit, and kind of in the presumption that if I keep spending fast enough, then it won't catch up with me. Sort of notion, and I am, believe me, no expert, but I'm pretty sure it doesn't work that way. So yeah, Renee.
I just want to say very briefly, because this is very complicated, and I think we all agree with that. And I thought where you were going to go with your third part is the credit part, but the virgins come to mind. That we do have to be good stewards, and that's where the rub comes.
Yeah.
Because the landowner continually gave away offers, you know,
Right.
for.
Right, that we're not actually God with unlimited resources.
Yes, so
Yeah,
it's a
that's
very,
true.
it's a very,
Yeah. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And somewhere in the middle there is closer to the landowner and less the first hour labor. Rod, and then we're gonna be close.
Now, I'm going to come at this from a slightly different point of view. So far, we've talked about this generosity and the giving of.
Yep.
What we haven't talked about is the creating of the generosity, which was the first worker, or the first workers.
Yeah.
Because in reality, the first worker produced more of the capacity to be generous than the last worker did.
Mm-hmm.
So, and many of us today here, those who are first workers have a responsibility of taking care of those who are the last workers. So it's because, as we said here earlier, there isn't in the real world unlimited resources.
Right.
They have to be created. So the person who yields 600 bushels per acre is producing more than the person who does 200 bushels per acre.
Right.
So there's a surplus that has to be created to be distributed as generosity. So I think there's another lesson we learned here. What is the proper role of the first hour?
We'll leave it to you to just completely turn it all on our head. Excellent. I guess we'll have to look at the parable again another time, which is just fine. But I hope this was a fruitful discussion. Let's close with the benediction. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ and the love of God and the communion of the Holy Spirit be with you all. Amen. Thank you, everyone. Great discussion.